anyone here who has been married or really in any long-term relationship will be able to relate when I say that there are certain things about my husband that I, in equal measure, love about him, and they drive me crazy. My husband David is a driven, curious, and passionate person. If something piques his interest or bothers him enough, he'll investigate it and learn about it with an almost obsession-like focus. And one of his most enduring obsessions is with cooking. And I love that he loves to cook. It is one of the things that attracted me the most to him, and it is one of the things that we really enjoy doing together. And recently he's been watching a series of videos from world-renowned chefs like Gordon Ramsay and Wolfgang Puck called Masterclass. And he's been learning things like basic knife skills, how to carve and use a whole chicken, how to perfectly roast or saute vegetables, and how to build a flavor profile using fresh herbs and spices. And not long into these masterclass sessions, David came home from the grocery store with about 5 different kinds of salt. And all of a sudden, the way I had been cooking and salting our food was all wrong. Evidently, good old Morton iodized salt is not good enough for the master chef. There is a big difference between kosher salt, sea salt, fine and coarse-grained salts, all of which can completely change the flavor and the texture of a dish if they were to be applied in the wrong way. Who knew that something as simple as salt could be so complicated? Well, as it turns out, salt actually has a rather complicated history. For many centuries and millennia, salt has been a valuable mineral, essential for life. Not only does it help enhance and provide flavor to food, but salt was used and is still used to preserve meats and other food, which in the times before refrigeration meant the difference between surviving the winter or surviving a long journey or not. Salt was necessary in the desert climate of much of the ancient Near East to help hydrate humans and animals and replenish essential minerals and electrolytes lost in the heat of the day. Salt was useful in healing common ailments, just as it is today. I mean, who hasn't soaked their feet or their body in a bath of Epsom salt to soothe aching and sore muscles and joints? It was so valuable in Jesus' time that salt was even used as currency. In fact, our word for salary comes from the same root word as salt. Now, this summer, we have been talking about and exploring the blessings of the Beatitudes. And even though today's text isn't technically a beatitude, it is still a blessing. Jesus is giving a great compliment to his followers as he tells them, "You are the salt of the earth." Salt was a symbol and a sign of the covenant between God and God's people. It was used as a purifier in rituals involving temple sacrifices, as well as in rituals involving the sealing of God's covenant with the people. Quite simply, salt was necessary for life, and it was necessary in the bond between the people and God. Light was also a powerful symbol and the relationship between God and the people. The prophet Isaiah talks about the light, saying, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined." Isaiah also relays to the people these words from God: "I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. And I have given you a covenant to the people, a light to the nations." The Beatitudes and this passage about the salt and the light, they're part of a larger discourse here in Matthew known as the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount contains some of Jesus' most well-known and loved teachings. It's part of why Matthew included them in his gospel at all. These are the teachings of Jesus that get to the very core of his ministry: the coming of God's kingdom, the fulfillment of the law, and what life lived according to the values of God's kingdom looks like: true discipleship. And it all begins with blessings. Our life of faith, our relationship with Christ, and our journey to follow him begins with blessing. It doesn't begin with guilt and sin, but with a gift. This blessing of being identified as salt and light, it comes with a challenge and a responsibility. Like the early covenant with God and Israel, the blessing that we receive comes with a purpose. And as cliched as this phrase might be becoming, the saying still holds true: we are blessed to be a blessing. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? Who in their right mind, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket instead of on a lampstand where it can give light to the whole house? See, here's the challenge embedded within the blessing. The blessing is already ours. We don't have to earn it. But now that we have it, what are we going to do with it? Now let's think about this seriously. How can salt lose its saltiness? Technically, salt cannot lose its flavor. The only way for this to happen is for it to be poorly applied, for it to be dissolved, diluted, diminished, and dispersed in its surrounding environment in such a way as to become indistinguishable and unnoticeable. And the same goes with the light. Light's purpose is to illuminate the darkness. Now, besides being a fire hazard, why would someone go through the trouble of lighting a lamp only to cover it up with a basket? That's not how lamps work. With these blessings, Jesus is calling his followers and us to stand out from the world around us and to illuminate the darkness, using these gifts in the ways that God has intended them to be used. Not to show others how good we are, but to show the world how good God is. It also shouldn't escape us that the power of salt and light are multiplied exponentially in large quantities. We all know that one tiny pinch of salt isn't going to flavor the whole gumbo pot. And one small candle will never be enough to illuminate the whole house. This blessing of salt and light, it isn't just for us as individuals, but for us as community, as God's beloved community. Just as the salt flows from the mountains to the creeks and the streams, to the rivers, to the delta, and out into the ocean, giving the ocean its saltiness. And just as the powerful lights illuminate our streets and our cities so that they can be seen from space, we too, working together and in the power of the Holy Spirit, can do equally powerful things. Change the landscape around us and light up the world. This salt and light life is a life of blessing. Blessing for those who are at the end of their rope. Blessing for the ones who are mourning. Blessing for the meek and merciful, for the pure in heart, and for the ones who make peace. And blessing for those who are outcast and persecuted because they have chosen to follow this path. The blessing begins with God. It always begins with God. And it continues in us, in the ways in which we share that blessing with others, living into our identities as salt and light, giving flavor to life, preserving it, and honoring the covenant between us and God, and sharing our light, illuminating the dark places around us, and pointing back to the source of our light, so that God may be glorified in our actions and in our lives. May it be so with me, and may it be so with us. Amen.